How has your day been so far? Hello, we're AETA Stories, and today we're sharing a brand new original story with you.
Paul Whitmore had learned how to sit very still. In his home office on the north side of Chicago, he kept his shoulders relaxed, his breathing slow, his face neutral. From the outside, nothing about him suggested panic. He looked like a man in control, neatly dressed, hair trimmed, hands steady as they rested on the edge of the desk. But inside, everything was coming apart. His phone vibrated again. Then again. Paul did not pick it up right away. He already knew what it would say. Another notification. Another reminder. Another warning that time had almost run out. When he finally turned the screen, face up, the words blurred together into the same message he had been reading for weeks. Overdue balance, final notice, immediate action required. Gambling losses layered on top of credit cards. Short-term loans feeding long-term ruin. Every attempt to win it back had only made the hole deeper. He closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled through his nose. Calm, he told himself. Stay calm. Paul lived two lives, and he had become very good at keeping them separate. One phone lay openly on his desk, synced to shared calendars and polite reminders, dinners, meetings, anniversaries. The other stayed hidden in a drawer, kept on silent, used only for messages he never wanted his wife to see. On that second phone, collectors called at all hours. Numbers he did not recognize. Voices that no longer bothered to sound patient. Sometimes they called his office line. That was new. That was dangerous. Catherine Whitmore trusted him. Kate, as everyone called her, believed in order, transparency, and careful planning. She believed that problems could be solved if they were addressed early and honestly. Paul had let her believe that about him, too. Kate was everything he was not. At 41, she ran a regional network of senior care facilities, assisted living centers known for their cleanliness, stability, and reputation. She moved through her days with quiet confidence, dressed in tailored suits, speaking in measured tones that made people listen. Staff trusted her. Partners respected her. Investors rarely questioned her decisions. At home, she was gentle in a way Paul had once mistaken for weakness. She asked how his day had been. She believed his answers. When he said he was tired, she told him to rest. When he said he had meetings late into the evening, she warmed leftovers and left the kitchen light on for him. Paul watched her from a distance, even when they sat in the same room. He felt something tight and bitter in his chest when she spoke about new projects or expanding services. She never bragged. She never needed to. Her success was simply a fact of life, solid, unquestioned, permanent. His was not. Paul's resentment did not arrive all at once. It had grown slowly, like mold in a dark place. At first, he had been grateful. Kate had supported him after his failed startup, helped him recover, never once thrown his mistakes in his face. But gratitude had curdled into something uglier. Every achievement of hers reminded him of what he lacked. Every calm solution she offered felt like a quiet judgment. He smiled at her anyway. He had learned how. There was someone else now. Emily Carter. Emily was 22. With wide eyes and a laugh that came easily. She worked at a clothing boutique in a downtown mall, folding sweaters and recommending sizes, her future still unwritten. Paul had met her by accident, buying a gift for Kate, an anniversary present chosen with the same care he applied to every performance. Emily looked at him as if he were impressive, successful, strong. She believed his stories without asking for proof. When he spoke about being misunderstood at home, about feeling invisible in his own marriage, she listened with sympathy instead of skepticism. With Emily, Paul felt seen in a way that did not require explanation. He told her he was trapped. He told her the marriage was a mistake made during a hard time. He did not tell her about the prenup. He did not tell her that walking away would leave him with nothing. Instead, he spoke about timing and complications about fixing things soon. She believed him. That was the most dangerous part. Paul had not married Kate for love. Not really. He had married her because he needed stability when everything else had collapsed. He had needed shelter, status, a way to survive without admitting failure. Kate had offered partnership. Paul had offered commitment. It had seemed fair at the time. 7 years later, the silence between them was heavy with things never said. Kate trusted. Paul hid. And every unanswered call, every unpaid balance, every secret message pushed him closer to a truth he refused to face. Something was going to break. The question was no longer whether it would happen, but who would pay the price when it did. Paul found the will by accident, or at least that was how he later described it to himself. Kate was at work, her schedule packed with meetings and site visits. The house was quiet in the way it rarely was during the day, and Paul had gone into the study to look for a tax document he claimed he needed. He opened drawers he normally ignored, flipping through neatly labeled folders, each one a reflection of Kate's habit of planning for every possible future. That was when he saw the envelope. It was thicker than the others, marked with a date from the previous year. The word will was printed clearly across the top. Paul stood still for a long moment, his fingers hovering above it, his pulse quickening as if his body already understood what his mind had not yet allowed itself to consider. He told himself he was only going to glance at it, just enough to know what it contained. Paul sat down and unfolded the pages slowly. The language was formal, precise, written by professionals who had done this many times before. He skimmed it first, searching for names for clauses that mattered. And then he saw it, his name, not once but again and again, the sole beneficiary, the only person listed, no relatives, no charitable foundations, no trusts split among multiple parties, everything, assets, property, accounts, assigned to him in the event of her death. Paul stared at the page, rereading the sentence until the words stopped feeling real. His chest tightened, not with relief, but with something sharper, something electric. He thought of the prenuptial agreement she had insisted on before the wedding. At the time he had agreed easily, almost casually. He had nothing then, nothing to lose. The contract was airtight, written to protect what she had built long before she met him. In the event of divorce, he would walk away with exactly what he had brought into the marriage, which was nothing. Divorce was not an option. It never had been. Paul leaned back in the chair and laughed under his breath, a short, humorless sound. The irony was almost elegant. If Kate left him, he would be ruined. If she stayed, he would continue to disappear beside her. But if she died, the thought landed fully formed before he had time to push it away. By that point, his debts were no longer abstract numbers. They were real, pressing, relentless. Nearly $320,000 spread across credit cards, personal loans, and gambling platforms that no longer extended him even false hope. Every day brought new reminders that patience had run out, that forgiveness was not coming, that will change the shape of the problem. Paul imagined the silence after it was over. No more buzzing phone, no more collectors, no more lying awake at night calculating payments he could never make. He imagined transferring balances to zero, closing accounts, watching red numbers vanish from his screen. He imagined Emily in a different life, not waiting for stolen hours and vague promises, but standing beside him openly, a downtown apartment, a business of her own, a future he could finally control. Power returned in those thoughts, not the loud, aggressive kind, but something colder and steadier, the power of inevitability. Paul did not think of it as murder at first. He thought of it as a solution, a final correction to a series of mistakes that had been spiraling for too long. Kate had planned for every outcome, including her own mortality. She had signed the papers herself. She had trusted him completely. That trust became the final piece that made everything possible. He folded the will carefully and placed it back in the envelope, sliding it into the folder exactly as he had found it. When he stood, his legs felt unsteady, but his mind was clear in a way it had not been for months. Something inside him had crossed a line, quietly, without drama or hesitation. Paul left the study and closed the door behind him. By the time Kate came home that evening, he was already smiling, already listening, already playing his part. But the marriage had changed, and so had he. The nights became Paul Whitmore's refuge. After Kate went to bed, after the lights were off and the house settled into its familiar quiet, he sat alone in the dark glow of his laptop. He kept the screen angled carefully, the volume muted, the door to the study locked. These were not the kinds of searches a man wanted reflected in shared histories or accidental notifications. He told himself he was only gathering information, understanding possibilities, learning how things happened in the real world, not in crime dramas or exaggerated headlines. He read medical forums, archived articles, case summaries stripped of emotion and reduced to outcomes. His focus narrowed quickly. If something were to happen, it would have to look ordinary. Food poisoning, a sudden reaction, a cardiac event triggered by stress or something poorly tolerated. Nothing violent, nothing dramatic, something that could be explained in a sterile report, filed away with minimal questions. Paul was not interested in chaos. He needed plausibility. He needed silence. He read about symptoms without lingering on details, scanning for patterns rather than specifics. How long it took for discomfort to appear. How confusion could be mistaken for fatigue. How timing mattered more than force. He did not dwell on suffering. He framed everything as cause and effect, input and outcome. Distance made it easier. Acquiring what he needed required the same approach. Indirect, unremarkable, forgettable. Paul did not buy anything himself. He did not leave a trail that led straight back to him. He asked questions in places where questions were common, leaned on connections that barely registered as connections at all. Nothing urgent, nothing suspicious. By the end of the week, the plan existed fully formed in his mind, even if he never wrote it down. At home, his behavior toward Kate shifted in ways so subtle she did not notice. He became more attentive, more present. He asked about her day and listened carefully to the answers. He offered to cook, to drive, to handle small tasks she normally took care of herself. He touched her shoulder when he passed by. He smiled more. Kate took it as relief, as reconnection. She told herself that whatever distance had existed between them was finally easing. Paul watched her closely. He memorized routines, habits, preferences. He noted what made her relax, what made her feel safe. Trust, he realized, was not something that arrived suddenly. It was something reinforced quietly over time. Through consistency. The restaurant was the final decision. It was not a new place or a trendy one. It was familiar, comfortable, a location tied to anniversaries and celebrations, to conversations that had once mattered. Kate liked it there. She felt seen there. The staff knew them. No one asked unnecessary questions. Paul understood the importance of setting. If something went wrong in a place associated with comfort and routine, people looked inward for explanations. Stress, health, chance. They did not look for betrayal. He booked the table days in advance, requested their usual spot, planned the evening down to the smallest detail. Everything was meant to feel effortless. There were moments, brief, unwelcome flashes, when doubt tried to surface. Not fear of consequences, but an awareness of finality. Once the line was crossed, there would be no revision, no apology that could undo what had been done. Paul acknowledged those thoughts without engaging them. He had already gone too far. By the time he closed the laptop on the last night of preparation, there was no adrenaline left, no excitement, only a heavy, focused calm, the kind that came after decisions were made and alternatives discarded. Paul stood in the quiet house and listened to the sound of Kate breathing upstairs. He did not feel guilt. He felt resolved. There would be no turning back. The restaurant sat along the Chicago River, its wide windows reflecting the city lights like calm water holding its breath. Inside, everything was designed to slow time. Soft jazz playing low enough to feel private, linen tablecloths smoothed by practiced hands, silverware aligned with quiet precision. It was the kind of place Kate associated with milestones, not danger. She was visibly relaxed as they took their seats. Her shoulders lowered, her smile came easily, and for the first time in weeks, she spoke without glancing at her phone. The view pleased her. The familiarity pleased her more. "I'm glad we did this," she said, reaching for Paul's hand across the table. "It feels like us again." Paul smiled back, warm and unhurried. He had practiced this version of himself. He knew when to nod, when to ask questions, when to let her talk. He ordered confidently, joked lightly with the server, commented on the wine selection as if nothing in the world weighed on him. Inside, he counted minutes. Kate talked about work, an upcoming inspection, a staffing issue she had finally resolved, a facility expansion she was excited about. Paul listened closely, responding in the right places, careful not to interrupt the rhythm of her voice. He noticed how comfortable she looked here, how easily the tension seemed to leave her body. Trust, he thought, was a fragile thing, but tonight it was intact. When Kate excused herself to step away from the table, Paul did not rush. He waited until she disappeared into the direction of the restrooms, then glanced around casually. Nearby tables were absorbed in their own conversations. The server was occupied across the room. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small container. His movements were precise, practiced. He tilted Kate's wine glass just enough, poured, then swirled the liquid gently so nothing appeared out of place. It took seconds. By the time he set the glass back down, his hands were steady. When Kate returned, she noticed nothing unusual. They raised their glasses. She smiled, took a sip, and continued speaking. Paul watched her carefully, noting each movement, each expression. He waited. Dinner passed smoothly. Plates were cleared. Dessert arrived and went mostly untouched. Kate finished her wine slowly, savoring it, unaware that the evening had already shifted beyond her control. At first, the change was subtle. She paused mid-sentence, pressing her fingers briefly to her temple. "I feel a little lightheaded," she said dismissively. "Probably just the wine." Paul leaned forward at once, concern softening his features. "Do you want some water?" She nodded, embarrassed more than worried. He flagged the server, thanked them politely, apologized for the inconvenience. Everything looked normal, but the feeling did not pass. Kate's color faded slightly. Her words slowed. She pushed her plate away, appetite gone. When she stood, she swayed just enough for Paul to notice, and for no one else to question it. "Let's get some air," he suggested gently, already rising. "You've had a long week." Outside, the cool night breeze brushed against them. Kate drew a breath, hoping it would help, but instead she frowned, her hand tightening around Paul's arm. "Something's not right," she murmured. Paul wrapped an arm around her shoulders, guiding her carefully toward the car. "It's okay. I've got you. We'll go to the hospital and get you checked out." His voice was calm, reassuring. Anyone watching would have seen a devoted husband responding quickly, responsibly. Paul paid the bill without hesitation, thanked the staff, waved off concern with practiced ease. In the car, Kate leaned back against the seat, breathing unevenly. Her eyes fluttered, closed for a moment before opening again, unfocused. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know why this is happening." Paul reached over and squeezed her hand. "Don't worry about anything. Just stay with me." He pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic as the city lights slipped past. To Kate, everything felt disjointed, unreal. To Paul, the night unfolded exactly as planned. The river disappeared behind them, and with it, the last place Kate had felt completely safe. The city thinned behind them as Paul drove north, the glow of streetlights giving way to darker stretches of road. At first, Kate assumed it was a shortcut, an unfamiliar route chosen to avoid traffic. She leaned back against the seat, trying to steady her breathing, trying to convince herself that the nausea and dizziness would pass if she stayed calm. But the lights kept disappearing. Her vision blurred at the edges. The rhythm of the car felt wrong, too smooth, too deliberate. She turned her head toward Paul, trying to focus on his profile, on something familiar. His expression was composed, eyes fixed on the road, hands steady on the wheel. "Paul," she said quietly, "where are we going?" He did not answer right away. The road narrowed, trees closing in on either side. The hum of the tires grew louder in the absence of traffic. Kate's stomach clenched with a sudden, unmistakable sense of fear. "This doesn't feel like the way to the hospital," she said, her voice unsteady now. She reached for the door handle, then stopped, confused by her own hesitation. Her fingers felt slow, uncooperative. Paul exhaled, almost gently, and eased the car onto the shoulder. He shifted into park and turned off the engine. The silence pressed in immediately, thick and unnatural. Kate looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her chest tightened. "Paul," she whispered, "what's happening?" He turned toward her then. The concern was gone from his face, replaced by something distant and cold. Not anger, not excitement, just resolve. "I didn't take you to the hospital," he said evenly. "I never planned to." Her mind struggled to catch up with the words. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I'm sick. I need help." Paul nodded once, as if acknowledging a minor inconvenience. "You're sick because I made you sick." The sentence landed without emphasis, without cruelty in the delivery. That was what made it unbearable. Kate stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "You," she swallowed. "Try it again. You're not making sense." "I poisoned the wine," Paul said, "back at the restaurant." For a moment, she could not breathe. The night seemed to tilt, reality slipping sideways. "That's not funny," she said weakly. "Paul, stop." He watched her struggle, his expression unchanged. It wasn't supposed to be funny. Her thoughts fractured, images overlapping, memories crashing into one another. The dinners, the smiles, the careful touches. "Why?" she asked, the word tearing out of her. "Why would you do this?" Paul looked ahead through the windshield, as if the answer were written somewhere in the darkness. "Because I had no other way out." He spoke slowly, methodically, as though explaining a business decision. He told her about the debts, the gambling losses, the calls from collectors she had never heard. He told her about the prenuptial agreement and how it left him with nothing if he walked away. And finally, he told her about the will. "You made me your sole beneficiary," he said. "You signed it yourself." Kate shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "I trusted you," she said. "I trusted you with everything." Paul met her gaze at last. "That was your mistake." The words cut deeper than the confession itself. She reached for him instinctively, her hand brushing his sleeve. "Please," she said, "we can fix this. Whatever it is, we can fix it." He pulled away. Paul opened his door and stepped out of the car. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of damp earth and leaves. He walked around to her side and opened the passenger door. "Get out," he said. Kate stared at him in disbelief. "I can't," she whispered. "I can barely stand." "That's not my problem anymore." She tried to unbuckle her seatbelt, her fingers fumbling. When she moved to stand, her legs gave out beneath her. Paul caught her wrist, not to help but to pull her free. She collapsed onto the gravel shoulder, the impact driving the breath from her lungs. The ground was cold and wet beneath her hands. She gasped, trying to push herself upright, but her body refused to cooperate. Panic surged through her, sharp and overwhelming. "Paul," she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't leave me here. I'll die." He looked down at her without pity. "That's the idea." She sobbed then, the sound raw and desperate. "I loved you," she said. "I gave you everything." Paul crouched briefly, close enough for her to see the contempt in his eyes. "You gave me everything except control," he said, "and I was tired of living in your shadow." He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket. "You were convenient," he added. "Nothing more." Those final words stripped her of something essential, not just dignity, but the last illusion that any of this had been a misunderstanding. Paul closed the car door, the sound sharp in the quiet night. He started the engine, the headlights flaring briefly before turning away. Kate watched from the ground as the car pulled back onto the road, its taillights shrinking until they disappeared entirely. The darkness rushed in to take their place. Kate lay alone on the roadside, the pain inside her body intensifying with every shallow breath. The man she had trusted for 7 years was gone, and with him, the life she thought she understood. What remained was the cold, the silence, and the terrifying certainty that she had been left there to die. Kate lay where Paul had left her, the night pressing down from all sides. The road was empty, a narrow ribbon of asphalt cutting through trees that swayed faintly in the wind. Moisture soaked into her clothes from the ground beneath her, the cold seeping through fabric and skin until it felt as though it were settling inside her bones. Her body no longer obeyed her. Each breath came shallow and uneven, scraping through her chest like broken glass. The pain in her abdomen had grown sharp and consuming, radiating outward in waves that made her vision dim. Her hands trembled as she tried to push herself upright, but her arms collapsed beneath her weight. The effort left her gasping, her heart racing erratically. "This cannot be happening," she thought, the idea looping uselessly in her mind. "This is my husband. This is my life." Memories surfaced without order. Board meetings, shared dinners. Mornings spent planning expansion strategies for her senior care facilities. The calm competence she had built her life on felt distant now, unreal, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. She tasted bile and fear. Tears slid down her temples into the dirt. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent, exhausted grief. She had trusted Paul completely. 7 years of quiet compromise, of believing stability meant safety. Now that belief was unraveling, thread by thread in the dark. Her chest tightened suddenly, breath hitching as a new wave of dizziness rolled through her. The edges of the world blurred. She wondered, briefly, how long it would take before someone found her, if anyone ever would. The thought that her life might end here, unnamed and unnoticed, terrified her more than the pain itself. Kate forced her eyes open again, and then she saw the light. At first, it was faint, just a distant glow cutting through the darkness. She thought it might be a hallucination, her mind grasping for comfort as her body shut down. But the sound followed, the low, steady hum of an engine approaching. A car, summoning the last of her strength. Kate lifted one arm. It shook violently, barely rising above the ground, but she held it there, fingers weakly splayed. Her mouth opened as she tried to call out, but only a hoarse sound escaped. The headlights grew brighter, slowing. The vehicle pulled over several yards ahead, tires crunching against gravel. A door slammed. Footsteps followed, quick, purposeful. "Hey, are you okay?" A man's voice called out, sharp with alarm. Kate tried to answer. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The world tilted, darkness creeping in again. The man reached her, dropping to one knee beside her. "Oh, my God," he said quietly, already pulling out his phone. Can you hear me? She forced her eyes open, just enough to focus on his face. Recognition flickered weakly. Daniel Reeves. They had crossed paths professionally more times than she could count. Industry conferences, boardroom negotiations, cautious conversations as competitors who respected each other's work. Seeing him here, on this deserted road, felt impossible. Kate, Daniel said, disbelief cutting through his urgency. Kate Whitmore. She managed the smallest nod. He didn't hesitate. One arm slid behind her shoulders, the other supporting her legs as he carefully lifted her from the ground. She was vaguely aware of how light she felt, of how wrong that seemed. Cold air rushed past as he carried her to his SUV and laid her gently across the back seat. I'm taking you to my medical center, he said, already dialing a number. Stay with me. Do not close your eyes. She wanted to tell him what had happened, wanted to warn him, but the effort was too much. Her body was fading, retreating inward. Daniel spoke rapidly into the phone, issuing instructions, his voice steady despite the urgency beneath it. The car accelerated, tires gripping the road as he drove with controlled speed toward the city's outskirts. The interior lights blurred overhead. The pain dulled slightly, replaced by a heavy numbness. Kate's breathing slowed, her thoughts slipping away from coherence. As the car turned sharply, she felt something cool placed against her neck, heard Daniel's voice again, closer now, urgent but reassuring. You're going to be okay, he said. I've got you. Kate tried to hold onto those words, tried to believe them. The last thing she felt was movement, hands light, voices overlapping. As the car stopped and doors opened, brightness flared briefly, then vanished. Kate Whitmore slipped into unconsciousness as treatment began, her life hanging by a fragile thread. But no longer alone in the dark. Kate woke to a steady, rhythmic beeping and the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic. For several seconds, she did not understand where she was. White ceiling panels drifted in and out of focus above her. Lights too bright, too clean. Her throat burned when she tried to swallow, and a dull ache spread through her limbs as if her body had been drained of strength. She turned her head slightly and felt resistance and 4-line tugging at her arm. You're awake, a calm voice said nearby. Don't try to move. Kate blinked again. A woman in her late 60s stood beside the bed, silver hair pulled back neatly, eyes alert and steady behind thin-framed glasses. A physician's badge hung from her coat. You're in a private medical facility, the woman continued. You were brought in last night in critical condition. My name is Dr. Helen Reeves. I'm a toxicologist. Toxicologist. The word cut through the fog instantly. Kate's pulse quickened. Memories rushed back with brutal clarity. The restaurant, the wine, the road, Paul's voice in the dark. Her breath caught, panic rising. You're safe, Dr. Reeves said firmly, reading the change in her expression. The toxin was identified and neutralized in time. You were very lucky. What was it? Kate asked, her voice hoarse. Dr. Reeves did not soften the truth. An organophosphate compound, agricultural grade, colorless, fast-acting. In the dosage you were given, it would have been fatal within the hour without treatment. Kate closed her eyes. There was no room left for doubt, no space for denial. Moments later, Daniel appeared at the doorway. He stepped in quietly, his expression serious but controlled. Relief flickered briefly across his face when he saw her awake. She's stable, Dr. Reeves said, but she needs rest and no outside contact. Daniel nodded. Thank you. When they were alone, Kate turned her head toward him. He did this, she said softly. My husband. Daniel did not interrupt. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and waited. Kate spoke slowly, carefully, as if each word had weight. She told him everything, From the debts she never knew about, to the prenuptial agreement, to the will Paul had discovered. She described the dinner, the moment she left the table, the taste of the wine when she returned. She told him about the road, the confession, the way Paul had forced her out of the car and left her on the ground. Daniel listened without expression, but his jaw tightened with every detail. When she finished, silence settled between them. "This wasn't desperation," Daniel said finally. "This was premeditated." Kate nodded faintly. "He planned it. He wanted me dead." Daniel stood. "Then we're going to make sure the truth is documented and protected." He moved quickly after that, but quietly. No public reports. No emergency notifications. Kate was officially unlisted as a patient. Only a handful of people knew she was alive. By the next afternoon, Daniel had contacted Detective Laura Simmons. Simmons arrived without uniform, wearing a neutral blazer and carrying a thin leather folder. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and direct eye contact. There was nothing dramatic about her, just focus, discipline, and the unmistakable presence of someone who followed facts wherever they led. "This is attempted homicide," Simmons said after reviewing the preliminary toxicology report, "and the medical evidence alone is strong. But we need corroboration." "You'll have it," Daniel replied. Over the next 48 hours, the picture sharpened. Paul Whitmore's financial records revealed escalating debt. Over $300,000 spread across high-interest personal loans and credit lines. His gambling history showed consistent losses, accelerating over the past 6 months. There were late-night withdrawals, hidden accounts, and repeated calls from debt collectors, some of which had already begun reaching Kate's office. Then there were the messages. Simmons obtained a warrant to access Paul's cloud backups. What they found was precise, damning, and impossible to explain away. Messages to Emily Carter, promises of an apartment, startup funding, a future together once everything was resolved. One message, sent the night of the dinner, read simply, "Soon it will all be over. We'll start our life the right way." Motive was no longer a theory. It was documented. The final piece came from the restaurant. Security footage was requested formally, then quietly reviewed. The timestamp told the story with brutal efficiency. Kate stood and walked out of frame. Paul remained seated. He glanced around once, reached into his jacket, and poured the contents of a small vial into her wine glass. The entire act took less than 10 seconds. Detective Simmons paused the video. "That's it," she said. "That's the moment." Control shifted in that room. Kate lay back against the pillows, exhausted but lucid, listening as Daniel and Simmons discussed next steps. For the first time since the night on the road, fear loosened its grip. The evidence was speaking now, and it was telling the truth she had barely survived to tell herself. Emily Carter learned the truth in pieces. It began with a knock at her mother's apartment. Soft, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Emily's mother answered the door to find a woman who introduced herself calmly, professionally. Detective Laura Simmons. No uniform, no raised voice, just a request to talk. They sat at the small kitchen table, the air heavy before a single word of substance was spoken. "This concerns Paul Whitmore," Simmons said. Emily's mother stiffened. She had never liked Paul, had never trusted the stories, the delays, the careful way he avoided details. She had warned her daughter more than once. Now, listening to the detective outline the facts, Paul's marriage, the poisoning the woman left to die by the roadside, her face drained of color. "She's alive," Simmons said, "and we're building a case." Emily heard the truth later that night, sitting on the edge of her bed while her mother spoke in a voice that shook despite her effort to stay steady. At first, Emily refused to believe it. She cried, shook her head, insisted there had to be a mistake. Paul loved her. He promised her a future. He said his marriage was empty of formality. Then her mother showed her the name. Catherine Whitmore. And the rest followed, slowly, brutally. The will, the debts, the poison. Emily broke down. The realization didn't come as anger at first, but horror. The promises Paul had made, an apartment, seed money for a cafe, a life together, had all been built on the assumption that another woman would be dead. Because of him. Because of what he wanted. Because of what he had told her. "I didn't know," Emily said through tears. "I swear I didn't know." Detective Simmons believed her. The messages supported it. There was no indication Emily had known about the plan or encouraged it. She had been used. Carefully, deliberately. And now she was ready to help. Emily handed over her phone without hesitation. Every message, every voice note, every promise Paul had ever written. She signed a statement and agreed to testify if needed. By the time she left the precinct that night, she looked smaller somehow, older, stripped of illusion. The trap tightened quietly, while Emily cooperated. Simmons finalized retrieval of the restaurant's surveillance footage. The image quality was clear, the timestamp indisputable, Paul's movements unmistakable, the vial, the wine, the calm efficiency, no room for reinterpretation. With the evidence secured, the next phase began, not with force but with patience. Paul Whitmore received the first call on a gray Tuesday morning. The voice on the line was professional, subdued. A police department representative informing him that a woman's body had been found on a secluded road outside the city. Identification matched Catherine Whitmore, his wife. Paul paused just long enough to seem appropriately shaken. I've been looking for her," he said, voice unsteady in all the right ways. "She got sick after dinner. I tried to take her to the hospital. She stepped out of the car for air and never came back." The explanation fit neatly into the story he had rehearsed. The officer offered condolences and requested that Paul come in later that week for formal identification. Paul agreed immediately. When the call ended, he sat down slowly, heart racing, not with fear but relief. The plan had worked. The police had found her. The timeline made sense. The poison had done its job. He sent a message to Emily minutes later. "It's over. She's gone. I'm so tired, but soon we'll be free." Emily did not respond. Paul barely noticed. The second call came the following day, this time from a private banking institution. The tone was courteous, respectful. "We're calling regarding the estate of Catherine Whitmore," the representative said. "As the named beneficiary, we'd like to invite you in for a consultation to discuss next steps." Paul felt the tension leave his shoulders completely. This was it. The final confirmation that everything he had risked, everything he had destroyed had paid off. He scheduled the meeting for the next afternoon, chose his suit carefully, even practiced a subdued expression in the mirror. Grief controlled, devastation believable. He walked into the bank calm, composed, already imagining the moment the debts would vanish, already planning what Emily would say when he told her the money was secured. What Paul did not know, what he could not see from inside his certainty, was that every step he took was being watched. The evidence was locked in place, the witnesses aligned. The story he believed had ended was only waiting for its final chapter, and it would begin the moment he walked through the next door. Paul Whitmore arrived at the bank 15 minutes early. He sat alone in the quiet lobby, hands folded, posture composed. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. Everything about the place suggested stability, money that lasted, decisions that mattered. He welcomed the feeling. It made what came next feel real. When the receptionist directed him to the conference room on the third floor, Paul straightened his jacket and practiced the expression he had perfected. Restrained grief, dignified exhaustion, a man doing his duty in the aftermath of loss. He knocked once and stepped inside. The room was larger than he expected, anchored by a long table of dark glass. 3 people were already seated. Paul's breath caught. At the far end of the table sat Catherine Whitmore, alive, thinner than he remembered, paler, but unmistakably real. Her posture was upright, her expression steady, her eyes fixed on him without warmth or shock, only clarity. For a moment, Paul's mind refused to cooperate. The room tilted. The walls seemed to shift outward. "You," he began, his voice failing him. "Hello, Paul," Kate said calmly. He took an involuntary step back. "This isn't funny," he said hoarsely. "What is this?" Before anyone could answer, the door behind him opened. Detective Laura Simmons entered with two uniformed officers. Their presence was unhurried, precise. One of them gently closed the door. "Paul Whitmore," Simmons said, displaying her badge. "You are under arrest for attempted first-degree murder." The words landed without force, but they were final. Paul shook his head, backing toward the table. "This is a mistake," he said. She's supposed to be." Alive, his mind finished helplessly. Simmons gestured to a chair. "Please sit." He didn't. One of the officers stepped closer, not touching him, simply waiting. Paul's knees gave slightly, and he lowered himself into the nearest chair, eyes never leaving Kate. "How?" he whispered. "I watched you die." Kate finished quietly. "You watched me suffer." She slid a folder across the table toward him. Simmons spoke again, her voice measured. "We have a full toxicology report confirming organophosphate poisoning. We have surveillance footage from the restaurant clearly showing you administering the substance into your wife's wine. We have your financial records, over $300,000 in debt, sustained gambling losses. We have your messages to Emily Carter promising her a life funded by Catherine Whitmore's death. And we have the will." She paused. "You were thorough," Simmons said. "Not careful." Paul stared at the folder without opening it. His hands trembled faintly. Kate rose then, standing across from him. She placed a second set of papers on the table, separate from the evidence. "These are divorce papers," she said. "Filed and approved for immediate separation based on criminal endangerment and fraud." Paul looked up at her, eyes wild. "Kate, please," he said. "I wasn't thinking. The debts," I panicked. "I never meant—" "You studied toxins for a week," she said evenly. "You chose the restaurant. You waited until I trusted you enough to drink." Her voice did not shake. "There is nothing accidental about what you did." The officers moved and then. Metal cuffs closed around Paul's wrists with a soft, definitive click. He did not resist. He could not seem to move at all. As they guided him toward the door, he turned once more, desperate. "You loved me," he said. Kate met his gaze for the last time. "The man I loved never existed." Paul was led away without struggle. The courtroom months later was quiet. No shouting. No dramatic gestures. The evidence was presented cleanly, chronologically, without embellishment. The jury listened. The judge asked questions. Paul's attorney argued technicalities that could not undo facts. When the verdict came, it felt inevitable. Guilty. The sentence followed shortly after. 22 years in federal prison. Paul stood as it was read, his face hollow, the future collapsing inward on itself. He did not look at Kate. Kate did not look at him. She left the courthouse alone, stepping into daylight that felt different from the day she had entered. Lighter, sharper, real. Justice had arrived without spectacle, and for the first time since the night on the road, Kate Whitmore felt the weight finally lift from her chest. The world did not reset itself after the sentence was handed down. Paul Whitmore disappeared into the system, quietly. No statements, no appeals that changed the outcome. 22 years became a fixed reality, measured not in headlines, but in locked doors and numbered days. His name faded from conversations. For most people, the story ended there. For Kate, it did not. Recovery came in layers. Her body healed first, slowly, deliberately. The toxin left no permanent damage. but exhaustion lingered, a reminder of how close she had come to disappearing. She learned to listen to her limits, to stop when her hands trembled, to rest without apology. Strength, she realized, was not the absence of vulnerability. It was knowing when to protect it. Work followed. Kate returned to her senior care network cautiously, choosing presence over pressure. Her colleagues did not ask invasive questions. They did not need to. The facts were public, but the details belonged to her. She restructured her schedule, delegated more, trusted her leadership team in ways she never had before. The business did not suffer. It steadied. So did she. Emily Carter left the city within a month of the trial. She sent one letter, brief, handwritten, sincere, an apology without excuses, a promise to never repeat the same blindness. Kate read it once, then filed it away. Forgiveness, she understood now, did not require closeness. Sometimes it required distance. Daniel Reeves remained, not as a rescuer, not as a presence that demanded explanation. He checked in without intruding, walked beside her without leading. Their conversations stayed grounded in the ordinary. Work logistics, health updates, long silences that did not need filling. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, without declarations or urgency. When something deeper began to form between them, it did so quietly. There was no dramatic moment, no turning point that demanded recognition, just a growing ease, mutual respect, a sense of safety that did not depend on control or obligation. Daniel never asked her to move faster than she could. Kate never felt the need to perform gratitude or reassurance. They chose each other deliberately. Time passed. Kate learned that survival was not a single act of defiance, but a series of choices made afterward. The choice to believe her instincts again. The choice to establish boundaries without guilt. The choice to walk away from what felt wrong, even when it was familiar. She no longer equated endurance with silence. On the anniversary of the night, she had been left on the roadside. Kate took a long walk along the river. The water moved steadily beside her, indifferent and constant. She did not feel anger. She did not feel triumph. She felt present. Justice, she understood, was not about revenge. It was about clarity, about restoring truth to its rightful place, about ensuring that harm had a name and consequences. And then there was life, the part that continued. Kate's strength had never been loud. It had never required spectacle. It lived in her refusal to disappear, in her willingness to rebuild rather than harden, in her decision to choose life, not as an act of defiance, but as an affirmation of worth. Some wounds do not make noise when they heal. They simply stop bleeding. As this story ends, its meaning does not belong only to Kate. It belongs to anyone who has trusted too deeply, stayed too quiet, or mistaken control for love. It belongs to those who learned, sometimes painfully, that survival is not weakness and boundaries are not cruelty. If this story stirred something in you, take a moment to reflect. What does trust mean in your life? Where have you learned resilience the hard way? And what would choosing yourself look like right now? Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters more than you think.